Chapters 4 through 6 of The Art of Divine Contentment. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jen Raimundo. The Art of Divine Contentment by Thomas Watson, Chapter 4. The second branch of the text, the lesson itself, with the proposition. I come to the second, which is the main thing, the lesson itself. In whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Here was a rare piece of learning indeed, and is certainly more to be wondered at in St. Paul, that he knew how to turn himself to every condition, than all the learning in the world besides, which hath been so applauded in former ages by Julius Caesar, Ptolemy, Xenophon, the great admirers of learning. The text hath but few words in it, in every state content. But if that be true, which once Fulgentius said, that the most golden sentence is ever measured by brevity and suavity, then this is a most accomplished speech. The text is like a precious jewel, little in quantity, but great in worth and value. The main proposition I shall insist upon is this, that a gracious spirit is a contented spirit. The doctrine of contentment is very superlative, and till we have learned this, we have not learned to be Christians. 1. It is a hard lesson. The angels in heaven had not learned it. They were not contented. Though their estate was very glorious, yet they were still soaring aloft and aimed at something higher. The angels which kept not their first estate. They kept not their estate because they were not contented with their estate. Our first parents, clothed with the white robe of innocency in paradise, had not learned to be content. They had aspiring hearts, and thinking their human nature too low and homespun, would be crowned with the deity, and be as gods. Though they had the choice of all the trees of the garden, yet none would content them but the tree of knowledge which they supposed would have been as I self to have made them omniscient. Oh then, if this lesson was so hard to learn in innocency, how hard shall we find it who are clogged with corruption? 2. It is of universal extent. It concerns all. First, it concerns rich men. One would think it needless to press those to contentment whom God hath blessed with great estates, but rather persuade them to be humble and thankful. Nay, but I say, be content. Rich men have their discontents as well as others. When they have a great estate, yet they are discontented that they have no more. They would make the 100 talents 1,000. A man in wine, the more he drinks, the more he thirsts. Covetousness is a dry dropsy. An earthly heart is like the grave, that is never satisfied. Therefore I say to you, rich men, be content. Rich men, if we may suppose them to be content with their estates, which is seldom, yet though they have estate enough, they have not honour enough. If their barns are full enough, yet their turrets are not high enough. They would be somebody in the world, as Theodas, who boasted himself to be somebody, Acts chapter 5, verse 36. They never go so cheerfully as when the wind of honour and applause fills their sails. If this wind be down, they are discontented. One would think Haman had as much as his proud heart could desire. He was set above all the princes, advanced upon the pinnacle of honour, to be the second man in the kingdom, Esther chapter 3, verse 1. Yet in the midst of all his pomp, because Mordecai would not uncover a kneel, he is discontented and full of wrath, and there was no way to assuage this pleurisy of revenge, but by letting all the Jews' blood, and offering them up in sacrifice. The itch of honour is seldom allayed without blood. Therefore I say to you, rich men, be content. Rich men, if we may suppose them to be content with their honour and magnificent titles, yet they have not always contentment in their relations. She that lies in the bosom may sometimes blow the coals, as Job's wife, who in a pet would have him fall out with God himself. Curse God and die. Sometimes children cause discontent. How often is it seen that the mother's milk doth nourish a viper, and that he that once sucked her breast goes about to suck her blood? Parents do often of grapes gather thorns, and of figs thistles. Children are sweetbriar, like the rose, which is a fragrant flower, but hath its prickles. Our relative comforts are not all pure wine, but mixed. They have in them more dregs than spirits, and are like that river Plutarch speaks of, where the waters in the morning run sweet, but in the evening run bitter. We have no charter of exemption granted us in this life. Therefore rich men had need be called upon to be content. Secondly, the doctrine of contentment concerns poor men. You that do suck so liberally from the breasts of Providence, be content. It is an hard lesson, therefore it had need be set upon the sooner. How hard is it when the livelihood is even gone, a great estate boiled away almost to nothing, then to be contented. The means of subsistence is in Scripture called our life, because it is the very sinews of life. The woman in the Gospel spent all her living upon the physicians. Luke chapter 8, verse 43. In the Greek it is, she spent her whole life upon the physicians, because she spent her means by which she should live. It is much when poverty hath clipped our wings than to be content, but, though hard, it is excellent. And the apostle here had learned in every state to be content. God had brought St. Paul into as great variety of conditions as ever we read of any man, and yet he was content. Else sure he could never have gone through it with so much cheerfulness. See into what vicissitudes this blessed apostle was cast. We are troubled on every side, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8. There was the sadness of his condition, but not distressed. There was his content in that condition. We are perplexed, there is his affliction, but not in despair. There is his contentation. And if we read a little further, in afflictions, in necessities, in distresses, in stripes, in imprisonments, in tumults, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, etc., there is his trouble, and behold his content, as having nothing, yet possessing all things. When the apostle was driven out of all, yet in regard of that sweet contentment of mind which was like music in his soul, he possessed all. We read a short map or history of his sufferings. In prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23, 24, and 25, etc. Yet behold the blessed frame and temper of his spirit. I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Which way soever providence did blow, he had such heavenly skill and dexterity that he knew how to steer his course. For his outward estate he was indifferent. He could be either on the top of Jacob's ladder or the bottom. He could sing either the dirge or the anthem. He could be anything that God would have him. I know how to want and how to abound. Here is a rare pattern for us to imitate. Paul, in regard of his faith and courage, was like a cedar. He could not be stirred. But for his outward condition, he was like a reed bending every way with the wind of providence. When a prosperous gale did blow upon him, he could bend with that. I know how to be full. And when a boisterous gust of affliction did blow, he could bend in humility with that. I know how to be hungry. St. Paul was, as Aristotle speaks, like a die that hath four squares. Throw it which way you will, it falls upon a bottom. Let God throw the apostle which way he would, he fell upon his bottom of contentment. A contented spirit is like a watch. Though you carry it up and down with you, yet the spring of it is not shaken, nor the wheels out of order, but the watch keeps its perfect motion. So it was with St. Paul. Though God carried him into various conditions, yet he was not lift up with the one, nor cast down with the other. The spring of his heart was not broken. The wheels of his affections were not disordered, but kept their constant motion towards heaven, still content. The ship that lies at anchor may sometimes be a little shaken, but never sinks. Flesh and blood may have its fears and disquiets, but grace doth check them. A Christian, having cast anchor in heaven, his heart never sinks. A gracious spirit is a contented spirit. This is a rare art. Paul did not learn it at the feet of Gamaliel. I am instructed, Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. I am initiated into this holy mystery, as if he had said, I have gotten the divine art, I have the knack of it. God must make us right artists. If we should put some men to an art that they are not skilled in, how unfit would they be for it? Put an husbandman to limning or drawing pictures, what strange work would he make? This is out of his sphere. Take a limner that is exact in laying of colours, and put him to plough, or set him to planting or grafting of trees. This is not his art, he is not skilled in it. Bid a natural man live by faith, and when all things go cross, be contented. You bid him do what he hath no skill in. You may as well bid a child guide the stern of a ship. To live contented upon God in the deficiency of outward comforts is an art which flesh and blood hath not learned. Nay, many of God's own children who excel in some duties of religion, when they come to this of contentment, how do they bungle? They have scarce commenced masters of this art. Chapter 5. The resolving of some questions. For the illustration of this doctrine, I shall propound these questions. Question 1. Whether a Christian may not be sensible of his condition, and yet be contented? Yes, for else he is not a saint but a stoic. Rachel did well to weep for her children, there was nature. But her fault was, she refused to be comforted. There was discontent. Christ himself was sensible when he sweat great drops of blood and said, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet he was contented, and sweetly submitted his will. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. The apostle bids us humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, which we cannot do unless we are sensible of it. Question 2. Whether a Christian may not lay open his grievances to God, and yet be contented? Yes. Unto thee I have opened my cause, Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 12. And David poured out his complaint before the Lord, Psalm 142, verse 2. We may cry to God, and desire him to write down all our injuries. Shall not the child complain to his father? When any burden is upon the spirit, prayer gives vent, it easeth the heart. Hannah's spirit was burdened. I am, says she, a woman of a sorrowful spirit. Now having prayed and wept, she went away, and was no more sad. Only here is the difference between a holy complaint and a discontented complaint. In the one we complain to God, in the other we complain of God. Question 3. What is it properly that contentment doth exclude? There are 3 things which contentment doth banish out of its diocese, and which can by no means consist with it. 1. It excludes a vexatious repining. This is properly the daughter of discontent. I mourn in my complaint. Psalm 55, verse 2. He doth not say, I murmur in my complaint. Murmuring is no better than mutiny in the heart. It is a rising up against God. When the sea is rough and unquiet, it casts forth nothing but foam. When the heart is discontented, it casts forth the foam of anger, impatience, and sometimes little better than blasphemy. Murmuring is nothing else but the scum which boils off from a discontented heart. 2. It excludes an uneven discomposure. When a man saith, I am in such straits that I know not how to evolve or get out, I shall be undone. When his head and heart are so taken up that he is not fit to pray or meditate, etc., he is not himself. Just as when an army is routed, one man runs this way and another that, the army is put into disorder. So a man's thoughts run up and down distracted. Discontent doth dislocate and unjoint the soul. It pulls off the wheels. 3. It excludes a childish despondency. And this is usually consequent upon the other. A man being in a hurry of mind, not knowing which way to extricate or wind himself out of the present trouble, begins to faint and sink under it. For care is to the mind as a burden to the back. It loads the spirits, and with overloading sinks them. A despondent spirit is a discontented spirit. Chapter 6. Showing the nature of contentment. Having answered these questions, I shall in the next place come to describe this contentment. It is a sweet temper of spirit, whereby a Christian carries himself in an equal poise in every condition. The nature of this will appear more clear in these 3 aphorisms. 1. Contentment is a divine thing. It becomes ours not by acquisition but infusion. It is a slip taken off from the tree of life, and planted by the Spirit of God in the soul. It is a fruit that grows not in the garden of philosophy, but is of an heavenly birth. It is therefore very observable that contentment is joined with godliness, and goes in equipage. Godliness with contentment is great gain. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6. Contentment being a consequent of godliness, or concomitant, or both, I call it divine, to contradistinguish it to that of contentment, which a moral man may arrive at. Heathens have seemed to have this contentment, but it was only the shadow and picture of it. The beryl, not the true diamond. Theirs was but civil, this is sacred. Theirs was only from principles of reason, this of religion. Theirs was only lighted at nature's torch, this at the lamp of Scripture. Reason may a little teach contentment, as thus, whatever my condition be, this is that I am born to. And if I meet with crosses, it is but Catholic misery, all have their share, why therefore should I be troubled? Reason may suggest this, and indeed this may be rather constraint, but to live securely and cheerfully upon God in the abatement of creature supplies, only religion can bring this into the soul's exchequer. 2. Contentment is an intrinsical thing. It lies within a man, not in the bark but the root. Contentment hath both its fountain and stream in the soul. The beam hath not its light from the air. The beams of comfort which a contented man hath do not arise from foreign comforts, but from within. As sorrow is seated in the spirit, the heart knoweth its own bitterness. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 10. So contentment lies within the soul, and doth not depend upon externals. Hence I gather that outward troubles cannot hinder this blessed contentment. It is a spiritual thing, and ariseth from spiritual grounds. The apprehension of God's love. When there is a tempest without, there may be music within. A bee may sting through the skin, but it cannot sting to the heart. Outward afflictions cannot sting to a Christian's heart, where contentment lies. Thieves may plunder us of our money and plate, but not of this pearl of contentment, unless we are willing to part with it, for it is locked up in the cabinet of the heart. The soul which is possessed of this rich treasure of contentment is like Noah in the ark, that can sing in the midst of a deluge. 3. Contentment is an habitual thing. It shines with a fixed light in the firmament of the soul. Contentment doth not appear only now and then, as some stars which are seen but seldom. It is a settled temper of the heart. One action doth not denominate. He is not said to be a liberal man that gives alms once in his life. A covetous man may do so. But he is said to be liberal, that is, given to hospitality, that is, who upon all occasions is willing to relieve the necessities of the poor. So he is said to be contented man that is given to contentment. It is not casual, but constant. Aristotle, in his Rhetoric, distinguisheth between colours in the face that arise from passion, and those which arise from complexion. The pale face may look red when it blusheth, but this is only a passion. He is said properly to be ruddy and sanguine, who is constantly so. It is his complexion. He is not a contented man who is so upon occasion, and perhaps when he is pleased, but who is so constantly. It is the habit and complexion in his soul. End of chapters 4 through 6, recording by Jen Raimundo.